church history there's kind of an interesting account of what happened in Los Angeles in 1906. It was what they call the Azusa Street Revival. The Azusa Street Revival was the birth of Pentecostalism in the Western world, so to speak. And there was this enormous outpouring of God's Spirit. And it brought together people from all over the world. And it was one of the most amazing revivals in the last 200 years. Thousands of lives touched. But around 1909, the Azusa Street Revival seemed to disappear. And after 3 years of this amazing impact, this thing that would give birth to literally thousands of different denominations and an international missionary movement that has impacted continents all over the world, the movement really began to die. And the question is, what happened to the Azusa Street Revival? This revival that was so vibrant, it was changing so many lives, what happened to it? Well, a lady named Florence Crawford and Clara Lum happened to the Azusa Street Revival. Now, if you read the accounts of the revival, you never really hear much about Florence Crawford. You don't know much about her. But she and Clara Lum were the church secretaries. And during the revival, after about 2-3 years, the pastor of the church that was going through a revival, William Seymour, decided to get married to a woman who was meeting at the revival as well. Now, there was nothing scandalous about this. People got married in 1906, and it wasn't an unusual thing. But Florence Crawford got angry about it. She got angry because, like many movements in the early 20th century, they talked a lot about the last days. And they talked about the imminent return of Jesus Christ. It was a very big part of the revival. The Brethren were the ones that really woke up the church to the second coming, but the Pentecostals took it to places that it had never been before and promoted it greatly. And she thought, a pastor, if the end times are coming, shouldn't waste his time getting married. And so she got mad about it. And she and Clara Lum got really angry that this pastor got married. So they did the only thing they thought in protest that would make sense. They stole the mailing list. You see, the revival, the jet fuel for it is they'd publish newsletters about what God was doing, and they mailed them all over the place. And people came from all over the world to come to the Azusa Street Revival. And many times these papers drew new people to revival, and also people would send money to help the revival, because the people involved with it were absolutely living in poverty. They were hand to mouth, and they didn't have a lot of local support. And so this kept the movement going. They could pay the rent on the building, they could sustain the ministry, they could send missionaries, do all those kind of things. But Florence Crawford and Clara Lum stole the list and moved to Seattle. And all of a sudden, the contact of the revival with the whole world disappeared. The pastor, after about a year of just seeing things and they were going downhill, traveled with his elders up to Seattle to ask again if Florence Crawford could return the newsletter. But she had taken the newsletter and had started out sending newsletters on the mailing list, sent them to them, trying to convince them that the revival actually had moved to Seattle now and they needed to send their support to Seattle. And so money was coming into Seattle, and they refused to give the mailing list back to the Azusa Street Revival. And within a year or two, the revival was done. Isn't it amazing that one of the most significant moves of God that has happened in the last 200 years was killed by a church secretary? She never preached a sermon. She might have taught a bit of Sunday school. She never led in worship that we know. Yet this woman, who was part of the administration, part of the supporting network of this revival, decided to kill it because she was angry at a pastor because he decided to get married, and she thought that was a waste of time. Incredible, right? But this is life. It really is. We have people in our world that are part of our lives that provide a service. You know, they might be getting your license renewed, or it might be filing your income tax, or it might be getting your coat fixed. All these kind of things. And this world has this enormous support network, and they do what we call detailed work or administration. There are people skilled in certain things. Maybe they're construction foremen or something. And we rely on those people to get things done. You see, about 150 years ago, Western society, people were fairly self-sufficient. They would grow their own food. They would fix their own plumbing. They would build their own homes. But now, in our modern age, we depend on people. And this is a good thing. It frees us up to do some of the things we enjoy or want to do. But there's kind of this trade-off we have in that we depend on these people. And if you encounter someone in these support networks who decides that they don't like you or they don't want to give you what you want, it can create an enormous trouble. It can undermine your ability to get things done or to apply for things. And this is the administrative side of our society. We had a friend of ours, she got married in Greece. Her parents were from there, and she got married in Greece. And the whole island was held captive by this guy who issued the marriage licenses. And they were there, and they were trying to get a marriage license from this guy. But he wanted a bribe. And they went through all the process, and it took them days to finally get this guy to issue the marriage license. This guy controlled marriages in a whole country by himself. And he liked the power that was given to him. And he used that power in a way that brought people down and prevented them from doing what they do. He was supposed to provide a service, but instead, he provided a barrier. And this is what happens in this story in Daniel. If I could say one thing about the Persian Empire historically, they were administratively brilliant. They organized things. They had extensive math and economics and philosophy and all these kind of things, and they loved their rules. They made rules for everything. And one of the people that enforced these rules or wrote these rules or was part of these rules was a man named Daniel. He was a Jewish exile. He had been around forever. He was brought as a young man into exile in Babylon. And then when the Persians took over, the Persians saw this guy was really an effective guy and gave him this job. And he proved himself excellent. He was really good at it. He was an administrative genius. He was one of those guys where you go, I'd like to get this built, or we need to move these people here, or we need to make sure this part of the kingdom is fed. And he was the guy you went to because he was extremely good at getting things done, so much so that the king at that time, the head king, said, I can trust this guy with anything. In fact, I can really focus on some of these things that only a king can do and allow him to take care of things, and this makes my life work. The only problem is that Daniel wasn't the only administrator in the kingdom. And so you had this group of officials, this group of people who decided that their power structure and their ability to do what they wanted was affected by this guy Daniel. They didn't want to work for him because they recognized that some of the things they did would have to change if Daniel got the position. And so how do administrators prevent another administrative person in a brilliantly administrated kingdom and empire take down this guy? Well, you do it through administration. The Medes and the Persians loved their laws. Like, they wrote these extensive laws. It was very much like today. They had all these laws for things. And their laws, they were probably one of the first empires that their laws could supersede the authority of the king. It was one of those things that if a certain law got enacted with the king's permission, he couldn't change it afterwards. And so they went to him and they said, and this is a extensive example of buttering someone up. Oh, Darius, and you're amazing. In fact, you're so amazing, we would really love it if we could do this for you. We're giving you a gift. we're going to make it so that for the next 30 days, all worship is going to be directed to you because you deserve it. You're the best empire ever. And they stoked his ego. They buttered him up. And Darius fell for it. And he signed a law, signed something into law, an administrative move, a rule that was going to undermine him. He was tricked. And as being tricked, because he had signed this into law, he couldn't reverse it. It was something that had to happen and had to be executed. We're going to introduce you to 4 dragons in the next 4 weeks. And dragons kind of hold these common things in proportion. The first is they often begin with a charm offensive. Dragons make great first impression. They come into your life like a breath of fresh air. They're extroverted, or they're useful, or they're really good relationally, and they can come to you and they can go, I've got this great idea, or man, you're an amazing person. And so they hit you with a charm offensive. Often. Dragons often make great first impressions. Second thing they do is jealousy is their fuel. They not only want to be a significant person in your life, they want to be the most important significant person in your life. And so they will get in your life and they will want to dominate it and alter not only you, but your relationships with other people. Dragons hate competition. And so often when they come into your life, they'll find ways to finagle people out of your way or to dominate things to such an extent that the ultimate voice in your head that you have to listen to is their opinion. A dragon, they never quit. They just keep poking. They are determined people. A dragon in your life is someone that will poke until you give in. And we're going to learn a lot about this when we talk about a lady named Delilah next week. What else? They have a noble excuse for everything. This is something you have to understand. Dragons think they're right. They're not like, I'm evil, I'm going to undermine you. They have a sense of righteousness. And that sense of righteousness that they have is so deeply embedded that they think they're not just right, but everybody else has to obey the rules that they're making. That's what dragons love to do. They love to virtue signal, I think is the word we use it for today. They like to project righteousness, and they like to punish those who violate the rules. They wreck their reputation, or they attack them, or they undermine them, or they try to get them to lose their job. They have a noble excuse for everything, and often their noble excuse is they're in the right and others are in the wrong. They love their whatever cause they're a part of, and they absolutely believe it's a right cause. Trust me, dragons aren't sitting there going, I'm going to do this evil thing. A lot of times when I'm the dragon, I do it because I think I'm right. And that's a dangerous mindset outside the influence of Christ in your life. God and godliness freak them out. Dragons hate godliness. They may never say it, but you get a dragon in a room if you're confronting them and you say, well, God's word says that. I don't want to talk about the Bible. Or you're just using this for this, or whatever. There isn't a sense of humility. They don't want to be corrected. The people in Daniel's life, they were willing because they thought, our power structures are a threat. But they actually thought it would be a bad thing if Daniel was put in charge of the government. And so they justified it in their own minds. And they were foolish enough to make a king look foolish. Not a wise movement or wise move in a totalitarianist world. But they had this, whenever they're confronted, Daniel bothers them. And they don't know exactly why he bothers them, but they bothers them. And they find that they can't really get Daniel on any of his administrative abilities. He's excellent. He's perfect. There's no faults found in this guy. So what do? They attack him on the godly front. They try to undermine his faith. And dragons hate God. They may not ever admit it, but they see God as competition. And they want to be the dominant voice in your life. And then the final thing, their story usually ends up in flames of their own making. Normally, dragons come to a horrible end. They may have their reign of terror, but normally, eventually, their mistakes catch up with them. And they fall apart. Sometimes it's after they pass away. Often in a family, if you have a well-intentioned dragon, when they pass away, the family feels really guilty. Because part of them is grieving the loss of a loved one, and part of them is relieved that that person is gone. Because it makes their lives way less complicated. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's true. Some people bring rays of sunshine when they enter a room. Others bring rays of sunshine when they leave. All right, you're plenty uncomfortable? All right, let's look at some things. The thing that the officials, this judiciary, this jealous judiciary have in a complaint against Daniel is jealousy. They see him as competition. They don't want to be put under him. They want to get him out of the way so they can either continue their action or can assume the role that Daniel has been placed for by the king. And they're willing to put their own necks on the line for this. Destructive jealousy is an intense desire for what others have, often rooted in insecurity, comparison, or unmet needs. Yeah, I can say that like. Envy, covetousness. It poisons relationships. You know, James says, where you have envy, there you find disorder and every evil practice. These guys are jealous. And like I said, they represent their cause feeling that they're in the right about it. But when it boils down to it, they're really just angry and jealous. That's the resentment that drives this dragon. So, a couple of things, and then we'll open up for questions. When they throw you to the lions, don't take a snack. This was kind of the point that I wrestled most with. Do I put it in? Do I put it at the beginning, put it at the end, or whatever, and all that kind of thing. But I thought it's a good starting point. There are going to be people in your life that are going to throw up roadblocks. And it may be an ambitious relative, or it might be a boss, or it might be a coworker. And this will really challenge you. And here's the challenge, okay? There's nothing wrong with confronting bad behavior. In fact, that's often the right thing to do. What you don't want to do is resort to sinful behavior to seek retribution on your opponents. This is probably the most destructive thing a dragon can do, is make you into a dragon. The thing about wrestling dragons is they tend to rub off on you. And so often when someone gossips about us, we want to gossip about them. Or if someone takes an opportunity from us, we try to take an opportunity from them. Or if someone's a threat to something we want, we try to take them out so we can slip in there. That's often the temptation. But here's the truth of the matter. Life isn't fair. There's going to be people that make your life interesting. They're going to get in your way. And the worst thing you can do is become a dragon to kill a dragon. We are the people of God. There is a better way. And sometimes it can make us uncomfortable because we want the power to get back at our enemies. We want to take them out. I remember years ago when I was on staff here at Sir Sanford Fleming College in the accounting department, there was this policy that we had, this process we had for writing checks. And we did an analysis and we discovered that for every check we wrote at Sir Sanford Fleming College, it cost $90 in staffing, paperwork, all that kind of thing. And a lot of checks we wrote were often $15. So we would pay $90 to write a check for $15. And we looked at that and we said, this is not efficient. And so I came with a proposal to the accounting staff that we would create a simple document that you just attach your receipts, it has your name on it, account number, all that kind of stuff. And it could be fast-tracked through so that checks, instead of costing $90, we would get the rate down to the low 20s. Seemed a little more efficient. And then I was asked to present that before the managers. But there was one manager who didn't like it because they were the ones that provided the most oversight to the process of writing checks, and they didn't want to give up their power. And so they nixed my idea. And I got to be honest with you, I was not feeling great about that. It was not a happy thing. But the thing that really burned me, 6 months later, they came back with the same proposal themselves. Okay, what do you do in that case? You feel like saying, I told you so, or why'd you take my idea, or way to go, or whatever. Those were the things I wanted to say. But instead I said, what a great idea, let's do it. Meanwhile, I'm inside, I'm going, murderous thoughts, torture scenes, car crashes, all those kind of things. But I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I decided early in my accounting career that it was more important that a thing got done that was right than my reputation or input being honored in it. And to be honest with you, in the long term, that serves you pretty well. But that's not the popular way of going, right? When they throw you to the lions, don't take a snack. Don't undermine it. Don't become a dragon. Okay? We're going to talk next month. We're doing a series called Enemy Mine, and it's around Easter. And we're going to be talking about one of the most difficult commands Jesus ever gave to us, love your enemies. It's a hard one because it's really easy to love people that like you. It's really easy to love people that love you. It's really easy to love people that give you what you want. But when you get somebody who's a graduate level difficult person, that's hard to love. Especially when it's someone you're like married to or in your family or your pastor or your friends. That's hard to do. But if you want to be a graduate level love person, you want to love like Jesus did, you have to understand how to love your enemies. And well, many people go, does that mean I'm going to be a walking mat? Everybody's going to walk all over me? No, quite actually the opposite. It's a humble way, but it's a right way. And so we're going to be talking about that next month. But when they throw you to the lions, don't take a snack. Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you, says the Lord. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The temptation when I'm around a dragon is to become a dragon. Do it God's way. You'll find in the long term, he's way better at making things fair or evening the tables. It may not be immediately and it may not be in this lifetime, but trust me, God will make every wrong right. That's the business he's in. And he's willing to do anything to accomplish that, including sending his son to die for us. We don't deserve heaven. If you are in the mindset that you think you deserve heaven because you're a righteous and noble person, can I just say, God is not fair. If he was fair, we would all pay for the sins we've committed in this world. It's grace and mercy we want, not fairness. And so when we extend that grace through Jesus Christ to other people, we understand that being fair or justice is accomplished through God, and he does a way better job than we do. So do not fear. You know, you're going to lie awake one night wanting to get that dragon back. But God said, let me do the getting back. Second, a true test of a person's character is what they do when they're given power. Abraham Lincoln talked about this. I thought it was brilliant. He said, if you want to test a man's character, don't give him adversity, give him power. You see, adversity, most of the time, actually helps us become better people. We don't like to admit it, but often when we're challenged or we go through a tough time or we go through a health scare or we go through a loss of a relative or whatever, most people become better people. The lie in society is that when people are done, bad things are done to them, it turns them into monsters. It turns some people into monsters, but a majority it doesn't. It actually helps them stay focused. Pain has the ability to help us focus and do the right thing because it takes away all the pretentiousness and all the fantasy in our lives and helps us focus. So sometimes we go through adversity. You know, for most people, the reaction they have is the right one. They hunker down, they trust God. But if you really want to test your character, what do you do when you're given power? What do you do when you're given power? What happens when you're given control of a situation? This is when you really come to the surface. And many of us fail this test initially. Luke 12:48 says, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." Matthew 20:25-28, Jesus called them together and says, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Now, I'm going to say something. Power, if used correctly and is aligned with the character of God, can be one of the most beautiful things in the world. Rules can bring life. Laws can liberate masses. If they're done with the right intent, with the right heart, and in alignment with godly character. So when I'm given power, the question is do I reflect that power the way Jesus reflects it, or do I reflect it in the way the Pharisees reflected it? There you have two religious symbols in contrast to one another. The Pharisees used the rules to bind people up and control them, to keep them down and to protect their own power source. Jesus used power to heal, to bring life, to challenge evil, to bring justice, to recognize those who weren't recognized. Jesus was the righteous person. The Pharisees were evil men. Both of them had rules. Both of their rules weren't necessarily a bad thing. It was the character they had when they used them. When you are given a job and you are given power, what character traits will align with that power in a way to honor God? And in God's kingdom, down is up. So if you're a teacher, you're given power. You can assign grades. You can choose who passes and who fails. And that power has been entrusted to you. And there's a good reason why you've been given that power. You've been given that power in order to create learning and thriving in the lives of your students. You are not given that power to be a gatekeeper who decides who wins and who loses. And a good teacher that has a large section of their class failing will think, oh, they're just dumb, or they're just not, doing enough, or whatever. And in some cases, they're right. But a good teacher aligned with God's purposes is going to be driven crazy if the students aren't learning. They're going to take the responsibility of communicating that learning onto those students. Yeah, there's going to be some bad apples. There's going to be people that don't engage. But they're going to do everything in their power to bring those students enlightenment and learning and growth and progress. That's the difference between a teacher that aligns with power and a teacher that uses the authority of their teaching position to honor and love God. It's very different. You might be, someone that works in an office where, you determine, you issue licenses or you issue permission for things. And if you're ever on the phone with one of these people, you find a totally different attitude in some people. And it is really interesting because a couple of years ago, we built a fence in our backyard. It was a really big deal for us because, I tend to be better at paperwork than in-hand stuff, but we built this fence. Not only this, we built like a high fence. We called it the Great Wall of Wheeler. I don't want to say it's big, but it can be seen from space. All right? But anyways, one of the responsibilities when you build a fence, we had to take down one fence, and then we had to find out whether there were any gas lines or anything like that. And so I called the city, and I got the person on the line. And I said, we're taking down this fence. It's kind of fallen over, and we're going to put up a new fence. We want to know where all the stuff is. Good for you. Oh, that's excellent. You know what? That's really great. What kind of fence are you going to put? Well, another wood one. We're going to make it a little higher. I didn't tell her twice as high, but we're going to make it a little higher, all those kind of things. And she said, okay, here's the local things we need. here's one place you're going to have to call just apart from us because it's not our area. But I'm going to make sure these other ones are taken care of. Wouldn't you know it, the next day in my inbox, the locals or locates and everything were drawn up for me. Permission was given. And it was just a breath of fresh air. You know what that makes me want to do next time? The next time I build something, it makes me want to call the city and go, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Now, what would happen if I did the same call and the person on the other line said, what are you doing that for? Listen, building fences is a big responsibility. You're going to need permits. You're going to need permission. In fact, maybe we should send somebody out and make sure you're going to do this right. And you know what? If you're changing the electronics in your house, I totally understand. You need an electrician to do that. But replacing a fence, for whatever reason, this person saw this as something that we can entrust to this individual. They asked a couple questions to make sure we were going to do it right and that we were going to make sure it stood straight and all those kind of things. Enough questions to understand that we had done the homework, and they were a gateway to success for us. Character combined with power creates freedom, it creates rightness, and if we're heading for danger, it closes the door and saves our skin. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice, and when the wicked rule, the people groan. Ezekiel 34:2 and 4. This is spiritual leaders in Israel. He said, woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. You have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound the injured, but you have ruled them harshly and brutally. They have used their power to beat people down instead of using their power to create the righteous result that God desired for his people. They weren't bringing people to God. They were actually driving them away. And they were hoarding God to themselves, and they were preventing others so that they could feed themselves. And this is what happens when power isn't combined with the character of God. Last one. We don't own power. We're just borrowing. There's a word in the Bible called stewardship. I love this word. And stewardship basically comes with this kind of premise. Everything you own isn't yours. It's been given to you by God. It's been entrusted to you. Your time, your resources, your talents, all this has been given to you. And if you don't believe that's true, I can guarantee you, probably about 5 minutes, maybe 5 hours if you're a really nice person, after you're gone, the question many people's hearts and minds is going to be, what happens to their stuff? Who gets the house? Does anybody claim the vehicle? Wait a minute, that's mine. Not anymore. Aren't I just filling you up with delight, talking about this? But the truth, that's the truth. I'm the pastor of this church. But, in a decade or two, many would think it's already happened. I'm going to start losing my marbles. And I might not be a very good pastor when I do that, right? Or, I'm going to want to spend more time fishing or doing something, kind of thing. And 5 minutes after I resign, people are going to go, who are we getting next, right? It's not they won't miss me. It's not they don't love me. It's not all those kind of things. But the truth of the matter is a church needs a pastor. And I'm not going to be the pastor forever, right? These things are entrusted to. Why? I'm a steward. And as a steward, if I align my character with God, then I look at the charge given to me and go, God, how can I pastor to bring people to Christ? How can I pastor in a way that honors you? How can I please the living God in my conduct as a pastor? Am I encouraging, am I building up, am I challenging sin? And am I rescuing people from the burden of sin and hurt and the lies of this world? If I'm not doing that, I'm not a very good pastor. Now, trust me tonight, we are not having a vote on whether I remain as pastor or not, okay? So don't get any ideas, right? But that's a rule. I'm a steward of that. I'm a steward of my house, my car, my possessions, everything. And so I live in light of that. We don't own power. As soon as you start thinking you own it, you're missing the point. It's been entrusted to you. 1 Corinthians 4 and 2. Now is required that those who've been given a trust must prove faithful. Not only am I entrusted things by God, someday I will stand before God. We call this the great white throne judgment, the Bema seat. This is not a judgment. When you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, all your sins are gone. They're forgiven. They're gone. God's not going to put a big screen in front of everybody in heaven and show your sins because Jesus covered them. They're gone. But God is so audaciously gracious, he wants to reward us for good things we should have done in the first place. So someday we're going to stand before God and he's going to go, I gave you this, I had you do this, I had you do that. Is this going to create lasting treasure or is it just worth nothing? And someday I will take my life in the balance to God and I will be challenged with, did I do things God's way and did I honor him with that? And we don't say that to scare ourselves. We say that to go, I need to, with abandon, take the leap of faith and do things God's way. Because God is so audacious, I should just do the right thing anyways, but he promised to reward me for it. And if he's going to reward me for it, that's just one more motivator to do it the right way. Right? A way of excellence. Luke 12:48, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. We are not given things for our own benefit. We're given them for the benefit of the kingdom of God. And so Daniel's dragons ended up coming to an untimely end. They made a fool of the king. They undermined a righteous man. They were so focused on getting power that they were willing to destroy the life of a good man in order to keep it. And it doesn't always happen in this life, but in this case, there was a happy ending. It's really interesting. Someday I'll do a study to you that righteous people that God delivers and righteous people that just go through more stuff, right? Because for every Daniel, there's a Job, right? For every, Jonah, there's a Habakkuk, right? And so some of these people, their righteousness continues through adversity. But Daniel's, this is one of those accounts where God goes, nope, I'm not done with this guy yet. We're leaving him there. I sometimes think when I go to heaven, I want to ask this question to Daniel. Did you pet the lions? Just asking, it seems a little bold, but that's what I would do because I love animals, like I would just, kitty, 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 I would snuggle up to them and hug them and love them and call them George, I would really, like to do that. I don't know if he did. I would like to think he did. But that's neither here nor there. Daniel did it right. Because he did it right, God was his advocate. And you don't, for all the people you want in your corner in life, God's the one you want in your corner. And God is in Daniel's corner. I've told this story so many times, it's probably annoyed with me for saying it, but years and years ago, Michael Jordan probably still is the best basketball player in history. I know some people think LeBron or somebody else, but Michael Jordan was the man. Like he was the Wayne Gretzky of basketball. And there was one game, he was playing for the Chicago Bulls, and it was one of those nights where he just couldn't miss. And he scored 68 points in a game. Almost unheard of. And that's basically twice as many points as the star of the game, right? And there was a rookie on the Chicago Bulls. He'd just been called up, and he was called in to make a free throw. Just one, not two. And he sank a basket, so he got a point. And so the press went crazy. They were interviewing everybody after the game. What an amazing game. They wanted to interview Michael, but they also wanted to interview the people around him. Like, what was it like being part of this? Like, the guy couldn't couldn't miss. Like, what was going on? What an amazing, historic night and whatever. And someone got to the rookie and said to the rookie, they said, what an amazing game. What are your thoughts? And he said, it was one of our good games for the Chicago Bulls. It was so amazing. And Michael Jordan and I got 69 points together. Right? That's us. Yeah. We're not the show. And whatever little power is given to me in this life, it's not to make me the star of the show. You know how you get to be star of the show? You love God with such abandon that he makes you the star of the show. He identifies you. He says, well done, O great and faithful servant. We often talk about whether we make people happy or not. We talk about peer pressure. We talk about your perception. We talk about reputation destruction. But not very often do we talk about the necessity in life and the desire, the highest call of a follower of Christ is to please the living God. That's not getting to heaven by the skin of your teeth. That's going, everything I have has been given to me, including the power and authority, the job, the ability, all those kind of things. He's going to hate me for doing this, but Kevin's my friend. He's not going to hate because I said he was my friend. He actually is my friend. Kevin has a trailer that he spends a lot of the summer at, going in the summer. That's why in the summer he's kind of scarce around here a little bit, because he spends time at the trailer. And pretty early on, he invited us up to the trailer. So we went to the trailer a number of times. Anyways, it was a shock to me to get there and follow Kevin around while he was fixing everybody's trailers and helping a lot of seniors that didn't know how to do things and coming by and doing that. He got time to relax. He read his book. He did all those kind of things. But he was always helping people. And I was like, he's on vacation. Why is he doing that? Well, because Kevin was being a good steward. He recognized there were very few people that could do what he could do where he was. And so he took some of his time apart to help other people. And he didn't resent them for it. He was just helpful. There's been times he's come over to my house or he's helped me with something that I have no ability or skill to do. Now, Kevin could hoard all that talent. He could, hate everybody and resent them, or he could charge them exorbitant fees. He could do any of that. And there's nothing wrong with earning money to do what you're excellent at. But Kevin's a steward. And someday, Kevin will stand before God. Sorry, buddy. Yeah. And God's going to go, you fixed Scott's dishwasher. Here's some treasure for you. Right? Why? Because he did it with the right heart. He was helpful. He wasn't just helpful. He did it with excellence. And I have talent. Not much, but I have. It might be, someone's asking a difficult question about some, theological thing, and they ask me. And so I say, well, there's this, and this, or if I don't know, I go and research and do that. That's what I'm trained to do. That's what I'm good at. I think about this stuff. I actually think about the hypostatic union and the significance of the Trinity and the different forms of atonement, and whether we're into substitutionary atonement or whether we're actually, another form of atonement, or, who brought in this atonement. Was it way back with Augustine, or was it one of the more modern theologians, Karl Barth or something like that? And I think that stuff. I know it sounds like gobbledygook, but that's the kind of stuff I like. Right? And sometimes somebody will come to me and they'll ask a really complicated question. That's why we take questions at the end. And I try to, with the best of my ability, be a steward of what God has made me passionate about and what he's given me. And I try to lift those and direct them to Christ most of the time. I got to be honest with you. The first few years of the church, I probably drove more people out of the church with my answers than I did encouraging them for Christ. Because back then I was young, I was naive, and I thought I was the smartest guy in the room. And you know what? I'm not, and it wasn't. And it doesn't matter who's smartest. What matters is who's focused on Christ. So next week we talked about a Jewish judiciary. Next week we're going to talk about driven Delilah. And this is a juicy one. You're going to want to be there for this one. So let's take a minute, ask questions. The baskets gathered up, and the worship team to come up. Who has a question about today's topic? Where's Richard? You thinking? I saw you out there somewhere. Steph at the back. Thanks. Quinn's doing double duty.
How do you think, I don't know how you think about like spiritual warfare stuff, but just thinking about like the dragon symbolism and spiritual warfare, like what do you think of that kind of stuff? Like does that apply to this?
Yeah.
Like the presence of spirits and spiritual warfare and praying for a spirit in someone's life, like do you think that kind of applies?
I think it does. We often think of spiritual warfare like a witch doctor putting a curse on us and, keeping us awake at night, or, an attack on a church where, someone, prays to Satan or something like that. And there certainly is a little bit of that in the world, and it's useful that we know as Christ followers we're against principalities and powers. I think that's Colossians or Ephesians. That's all part of our lives. I have to say, something happens when I pray that doesn't happen when I don't pray. That alters reality. It changes things. When we get people together to pray and they lift up something happens that wouldn't happen if we didn't. That's all a part of it. Spiritual warfare is a part of who we are, because we're not just opposing, bad people. We're opposing the devil's work in this world. And when Jesus was resurrected, he put us to work in this world, bringing the kingdom of God, bringing the wisdom, the healing, all these kind of things. Jesus says, as I do, you will do. We are Jesus' representative, his ambassadors in this world. And that invites spiritual attack. And trust me, if you haven't experienced it, you're probably just not seeing it yet. It happens. But here's the thing. 95% of the spiritual things I do have to do with how I treat the cashier when I'm checking out at Walmart, how I reflect and respond and speak to children who are growing up and are sensitive and vulnerable, how I write teaching each year to go, is this what Scott wants or is this what God wants? Whether you hold the door for someone or don't hold the door for them, or how you treat your spouse, or, how you manage your money. Like, these are all practical things, but they are deeply spiritual. The Greeks, they love breaking the mind, soul, and spirit into three different parts and separating and saying you could do one without the other and all that. The Hebrew mindset is completely different. The Hebrew mindset is the physical and the metaphysical are tied in. They're one. And so the most spiritual thing they might do is to till their field one day and to serve the poor the next. They see it all as the same thing. And I think that's not a bad way to look at the world. Everything we do in this life is significant. And Jesus said that by identifying even a cup of water given in my name will be rewarded, right? What you do, what you say, how you act, how you treat others matters. And in that character, when we are following Christ, and when we do that, it not only makes an impression here, it echoes in eternity. A great line from the Gladiator movie. It echoes in eternity. So, yes, there's spiritual warfare. Trust me, I've felt the weight, right? I've confronted the darkness. I've been through some real attacks. But most of my loving Jesus is smiling and shaking a hand and showing up for work with a good attitude and remembering to pray for my friends and people that need me, learning to love my enemies. These are all practical things that can happen in the office, in the home, in the business, in the world, in the shopping, in everything I do. And if I can align those values and recognize the spiritual in all those things, you're not far from the kingdom. It's a great question, Seth. Thank you. Someone else? Yes, Linda, up here.
Can you comment on why God allowed the men that were against Daniel to be thrown into the den with their wives and children?
Yes.
Because at times you think, is that a loving God?
Yeah. Well, first of all, remember something. It wasn't God that threw them in the lion's den. It was Darius, right? We are very individualistic in our society. Like we're taught to be islands unto ourselves. I think it's the reason why we're all so lonely. Back in those days, it was just part of culture. Wasn't bad, wasn't good. Had good things and bad things. You were very aligned with your family, your reputation, your conduct, your access, all these kind of things. It was a world of hierarchies, and it was a world of success and failure reflecting on your whole family. In the first time we sent missionaries 100 years ago or 100 and something years ago to the continent of Africa, we learned very quickly that if you wanted to reach a village for Jesus Christ, you had to reach a chief. You reach a chief, you get the whole village. You don't reach a chief, it's hard going, right? Because it's a very community-oriented type of society. And so the dark part of that is, in Darius's world, when you took someone out, you took their whole family out. Because if those children grew up and the collective shame of their parents reflected on them, you had a sworn enemy who might someday get power and someday might take you out. And it was a horrible way. It was very barbaric, but it's part of the world. If you became king, the immediate thing you did is killed all your rivals, including sometimes your own children. It was a horrible way to do the world. Not reflective of God. I mean, Jesus is obviously the way God outlined, and the law, Hebrew law, found in Jesus' example of morality and stuff, completely steps away from that. But that was the world they lived in. And so if that breaks your heart to hear that, you're not off base. It broke God's heart too. Yeah. It's just different. I love the historian. He wrote, "The past is a foreign land. They do things differently there." You know, they don't think the way we think. Yes.
Then why not brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, and wipe out the whole bloodline? Because that's what happens when a king comes in. He gets rid of the whole bloodline. Mm-hmm. Look at North Korea. Like, just get rid of everybody that might be opposed to me.
Yes.
Right? Why just the direct family line? Because that person's brother might want to come back and get some vengeance later too.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. For some reason, Darius, in his retribution, maybe his graciousness, focused on the immediate family. You know, it's definitely something to think about. You got to remember something about Darius too. He was a usurper. He didn't get his throne through hereditary. He led a rebellion, a little coup at the top of the Persian Empire. So he was always seen by people behind his back as, an imposter. And when he got married, when he became emperor, he immediately did what emperors did in those days. He married a bunch of people from the king's line. Took a wife, adopted children, did all those kind of things to be legitimate to his throne. So one would think that'd make him extra suspicious, but in this case, we don't know. Maybe Daniel whispered in his ears, goes, "Hey, you don't have to kill the whole family. In fact, I don't even think you need to kill the family or whatever." And the king says, "No, this is my rule. I do this," or whatever. I don't know. I do know one thing about the Persian Empire. They tended to do things right. They had a way, and it applied to you and everybody, and maybe that was the line of retribution they had written into the Medes and Persians. I don't know. Into the laws. You stumped me. I had to guess. Anybody else? Richard, no questions? What are you having an off day or what? Oh, we have another one here. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious to know, could God possibly be using some dragons to shape our character?
No. No, absolutely, Judy. In fact, like every family has one, right? Or two or three, if you're unfortunate. Challenging people are placed in our lives because sometimes they help rub off the rough edges we have. You know, sometimes they create other dragons, but sometimes they create beautiful things. And yeah, the real challenge is down the road where you go, this dragon made my life completely miserable. But I thank God because I don't think I would be the person I am today if they didn't make my life so miserable. Right? You know? We often think like, you know, the Count of Monte Cristo, the ultimate revenge, you know, getting back the person that ruined and destroyed your life. We love that story, right? But what we end up finding in that story, as we find in most stories, is the power of grace. Les Miserables, you know, where the just man provides a substitutionary sacrifice for the guilty man to go free, right? And so, yes, if you get to a place where you thank God for your dragons, you're not far from the kingdom, right? But yes, God will put difficult people in your life to help. You got to get to this place in your Christian walk, and this can make you uncomfortable. Am I willing to allow God to do what he needs to do to make me more like Jesus and to serve him more passionately? That's an uncomfortable thought because we want to be happy, we want things to be easy, we want to be successful. But the truth of the matter is I need sometimes the pushes God brings about, sometimes through adversity, sometimes through dragons, sometimes through pockets of power, to be the man he wants me to be. Because this life is just God, he's just preparing you for heaven. That's really what he's doing. He's working off your rough spots. He's making you more dependent on Jesus so that the transition from this world to the next is going to be a step that just makes sense. You'll slip from one reality to the other. Stand before your Maker and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And that means sometimes life is not going to be fun. And it means sometimes there's going to be dragons. I can't think of anybody that's ever accomplished anything that didn't have a dragon in their life. John Wesley was his wife. One of the greatest evangelists. Everybody wondered, John Wesley spent so many years on the road. What a sacrifice he made to be apart from his family. What people didn't know is he was running from his wife. His wife, she was a character. She would show up at his events and heckle him from the back. She was about twice his size, probably physically abusive. He had this man that God accomplished so many things in and was driven just further and further and further away from home. There might have been an ulterior motive in there, right? But it drove him out on the road, and the world was transformed because of it. Sometimes the dragon is what we need to do what God wants us to do. So, great question. Great comment, Judy. Thank you.